Has anybody been to knock on their door and ask them what needs to change for them to change their behaviour? Because I think they might do it for less than $50,000. In fact, we could buy them all a brand new vehicle for that. Now, some years later, I was in Auckland and I'd told this story, and this guy came and saw me at the meal break and he said, "David, I had the same problem in my street. I had boy racers doing donuts at 2 o'clock in the morning." He said, "But I didn't lobby my council for speed bumps." He said, "One night at midnight, I went out in my pyjamas, stood in the middle of the street and went, 'Stop.'" Now, that wasn't a slide change. Got to be careful about my hand gestures. He said when the boy racers got out of their cars, he explained to them that when he was their age, he was also addicted to his vehicle and to speeding and to doing donuts. And he said, "The only difference between you guys and me is now that I'm 50, I can afford better toys than what you've got." He said, "I've got a 4-seater jet ski anchored in the bay. Which of you boys would like to drive my jet ski tomorrow?" Now, he became the town troubleshooter for boy racers. They invited each other to their parties, and if anybody was having a problem with boy racers, they would ring him up and he would go and talk to the boys and sort it out. Now, this illustrates a dramatic change that has happened in our society, where we have moved from what I call the citizen model to the customer model. Christchurch was operating under the customer model, and this is what I call outsourcing our civic responsibility. We say to the council or to government, "We're paying our rates and our taxes, and we expect you to deliver a quality environment for us, and we don't care how much friggin' money you take out of our pockets to do it, you just solve the problems for us." And it's sending our country broke. In the old days, we would sort problems out ourselves as citizens. We would go and knock on those hoons' doors and say, "What needs to change in order?" I haven't got time to tell the end of this story, but I eventually had a conversation with these hoons. We came up with a solution that we could have fixed the hoon problem across the entire of Christchurch for less than $250,000. The end of the story is Christchurch is still trying to solve the hoon problem with speed bumps, and it's costing millions and millions of dollars. Not even that's working. Excuse me? Maria. So the key in this question is, how do I address the problem using only the resources I already have? So in that story of the guy in Auckland, he asked himself, how do I fix the problem using the resources I've got? And the resources he had was a 4-seater jet ski, and he worked out a way of solving the problem using just what he had. Now, some years later, I was running a workshop in St. Paul in Minnesota, and I was talking to them about how you can use your deficits as the driver of change. I shouldn't have put this slide up just yet. Put my hand up too soon. And one of the ladies in the audience said, "My deficit is the autumn leaves that fall from my trees. They're a bloody nuisance." And so we brainstormed how she could use the leaves from her trees to build a sense of community in her neighbourhood. And sorry, I preempted it. Here it is. A few months later, she sent me an email saying that she'd got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and seen a jogger emerge from the leaf pile and dust themselves off. And within a couple of months, people were driving from other neighbourhoods to come and jump in her leaf pile. And that leaf pile, again, I don't have time to show you the entire story, but that leaf pile led to the transformation of that entire neighbourhood as everybody took initiatives to make people welcome on their footpath. The second question you need to ask yourself is, how can I live today like I want to live tomorrow? Can somebody pour me a glass of water? Been yelling. Doug came back from the war a broken man. He'd lost his mind on the battlefield. And for 3 years he slept rough on the streets with other homeless men. One day he met Elsie. He fell in love. She helped him get his mind back. They eventually married. They got a house. But Doug had a burning passion to do something for the men that he'd slept rough with for 3 years on the streets. And his grand vision was to set up a soup kitchen. And he'd go out and he'd look at abandoned buildings and dream about turning these into a soup kitchen. To get to his goal, he started working double shifts and overtime, and he had established a bank account called the Soup Kitchen Bank Account, put all of the money into that account. One day he said to Else, I'll be working a double shift tonight. And Else said, Doug, it's time you gave up on the dream. She said, we've got one spare kitchen chair. Instead of working overtime tonight, why don't you go out and find one homeless man and bring him home for dinner? You see, most of us are investing enormous amounts of energy in dreams and in the means to the dreams. You see, Doug working overtime had nothing to do with providing a sense of home for homeless men. It was in fact the antithesis of the dream. And a lot of what we do to change the world is a means to an end that has no consistency with the actual dream. And in fact, many of us are lost in a cul-de-sac or a series of cul-de-sacs. We start going up a road for a means and then we get diverted on that, so then we have to do something else which is a means to the means to the means to the means. And we've forgotten what it was we were supposed to be doing in the first place. If you are not finding a way to live your dream in the present moment, then it will never happen. Maria. Good. Now, for many years, I was your classic dreamer. One of my dreams was I wanted to establish a creativity factory. And like Doug, I used to go out and look at abandoned buildings and dream about having all these artists working in this building. And my dream was that we were going to make fabulous public art and we'd go out at midnight and just put it out there in the public realm. And one day I had a revelation. This is my house. And underneath that house was a tiny little space. And I asked myself, why do you deserve a creativity factory when you're not even using the little space under your house? So I employed a sculptor for 6 months who came in and taught me how to sculpt in that small space. And I began transforming my front yard into a neighbourhood sculpture park. And it grew out onto council land. It's a whole nother story. I've got a bike track on 3 sides of my property. I began extending this into the backyard about 1.5 years ago. This is actually a community working bee, so the community would come and help me build this park in my own yard. It's another shot of the park as it's evolving. We even now have schools sending kids down to have a look at this area as an example of community engagement, community actually doing things. All right, now, we won't just press go yet. Now, the upshot of all of this is that now the world has become my creativity factory. See, I thought it was going to be just in a little building somewhere, but now, in fact, the entire world is my creativity factory. But all because I went, I've got a little space, let's start with that. Now, I just want to give you an example. I'm going to play you a little video, hopefully, of a process that we've been doing called the 7-Day Makeover. This one's in New Zealand, in a place called Westport. We've just completed one in Tuncurry in New South Wales, which is probably twice the size of the one that you're about to see. So they're getting bigger and bigger and more sophisticated. So let's go with the video. We are transforming town centres. If you go to the Creative Communities International Facebook page, you can see a 15-minute video, which is far too long for me to show, of the Tuncurry makeover, which we've just completed, which will just absolutely blow your minds what that community achieved. They raised over 52,000, 180 volunteers, 20 projects spread over a 0.4 kilometres of shopping centre. Now let me just explain to you what is wrong with our current systems of the way that we work with communities. Has anybody noticed that what we're addicted to doing when we want to make over a town centre or make an improvement to a town centre, the first thing your council will do is put a whole lot of money in the budget for a planning exercise? Has anybody ever asked them how much money they've got in the piggy bank to make it actually happen? Now, I had an experience a number of years ago in Auckland where I was asked to do a town centre plan, and I said to them, what's your budget? And they said $50,000. I said, is that my fee? They said, yes. I said, how much for implementation? Nothing. We won't know what we need for implementation until you've done your study. Now, I know that that means that it will be at least the next budget before there's any money in there. Now, has anybody ever engaged an architect to design them a house, and when the architect says, what's your budget? And you just go, whatever you like. I'm open to any suggestions. What are you going to get? This is a fatal flaw in our council planning process. So in this case in Auckland, I said to them, and this was a major turning point in my career. I said to them, I am not going to be a fraud on this community and have them engaged in consultation when I know jolly well that there's a 95% chance that nothing will ever get done as a result of the consultation. I said, so let's do a little experiment. What if I only take $5,000 as my fee? We put the other $45,000 in the middle of a table, and I'll run a 2-day workshop to help the community find the most creative way to use that $45,000 to transform their town centre. That totally altered my approach and actually was the genesis of the 7-Day Makeover, where we use that basic principle. So we give all this money to a consultant, and the consultant runs a community consultation process. Now, because there's no constraints on the community to say we've only got $500 to spend on your town centre, what does the community do? Well, it generates what I call the unaffordable wish list. So we put all these unaffordable wishes in a glossy report which goes beside all the other reports full of unaffordable wishes. There's always this group in town called the naysayers. They look at the report, they get mobilised, start lobbying their councillors, and the wishes get picked out of the report one by one until there's nothing left. The people who generated the unaffordable wish list all get jaded and check out, The only people left in our community consultation process are those addicted to talking and the one-eyed axe grinders. So after 5 years of nothing happening, what do? Put more money in the budget for another study. You know, I once spent 1.5 years working on a town centre full-time and discovered that a consultant had done the exact same study 5 years earlier, and nobody even told me before I spent 1.5 years working on it. So we just go round and round this circle. So what we're doing is inventing processes that break this cycle. I refuse to work with any community where there are not resources on the table to make something happen, and that we can do it within 12 weeks of my signing the contract. So from 12 weeks from when the contract is signed, we are delivering a makeover of a town centre 12 weeks later, but we do it in the last actual 7 days is the community part of the process. Now, we as a society are addicted to master planning. That's why we put all this money into these plans. When I first started doing this work, after the Auckland example, I won't tell you the whole story, but we developed a 12-week process where we would get a resource like $5,000. We would run a 2-day workshop. We would get people into project teams, and I would say to the community, you've got 12 weeks to get organised. I'm coming back, we'll do a makeover. Can anybody guess what happened in the 12 weeks that I wasn't there? No, there was plenty happened. Lady down the front's doing it. Lots of committee meetings. And I'd get a phone call. We can't agree on the colour of the pots. Come and sort us out. Now, some of those projects took 6 years to complete. Some were never completed. Others were sabotaged by the town naysayers. So we decided, what I'm illustrating here is that communities are also, like councils, addicted to master planning. That is, we must have a full picture of what we're going to do before we start. In the 7-day makeover, the first 2 days are planning, and all we want is a broad brushstroke of what we're going to do in the next 5 days. We do not have to have a comprehensive plan with everything sorted out. It will take care of itself. So what did we do? We cut the 12 weeks out. We said, all right, we'll go from the 2-day workshop straight into making, which gives nobody any chance to have a committee meeting. And then the naysayers only wake up at the end of the 7 days and go, holy shit, what happened to our town? Now, I'm not going to go into it entirely, but there's a revolution happening in planning around the world. We call it agile. It goes under a whole lot of other different names. There's a free downloadable book on my website called Agile for those of you who want to go further. The biggest example of it is in New York when Janet wanted to close some of the traffic lanes in Times Square to traffic. And she said, if I go to my traffic engineers and ask them, can I close the lanes? What are they going to say? They're going to say, we need to do a study. She said, I know the study's going to take 2 years. It will cost $2 million or more. And she said, I already know what the computer's going to say. No. So instead of spending the $2 million on a 2-year study, she bought container loads of cheap furniture from China. And one weekend went out and just closed all the lanes and filled them up with furniture. And she said, we'll know within 2 weeks whether it causes traffic chaos or not. The number one secret I'm going to give you, and this is the agile approach, everything you do is a trial. Do not try to plan your way to a great future. Trial your way to a great future. Everything you do must be a trial, not the final product. That's how do I act today, consistent with where I want to be in the future, but how do I grab the future and bring it into the present moment? See what she did? Instead of taking the circuitous route of a traffic study, etc., she just went, let's put the loose furniture in. Now that's been now spread across the entire New York. They now plan their bike tracks that way. Everything is done as a trial rather than trying to master plan it. Okay, the third question you need to ask, and I know I'm out of time, but what are the stories I'm telling that put a glass ceiling on the possible? We explored this in depth yesterday, but the older I get, the more I understand that every single thing you do is informed by the stories that you tell yourself subconsciously or consciously, and this is true for communities as well. I once worked in Wodonga as the placemaker. Wodonga called itself Struggle Town. Every town has a story. Every shopping centre has a story. Now, when I first went to Tuncurry, where we just did the makeover, this is a picture I took outside of the chemist shop. Now, Tuncurry straddles a major highway. And in the first meeting I had with the retailers, they said to me, the highway is killing our town. The traffic, the noise, the reason we're all going broke and there are so many empty shops is the traffic is strangling our town. Now, they didn't need to tell me that that was their story because I'd already read it. If you believe that, how are you going to treat the footpath in front of your house? You are going to psychologically have given up on it and go, so the story they were telling themselves. So if you want to produce significant change, it's not only change your own stories, you have to learn how to read the stories that communities are telling themselves and find ways to alter that. So in this case, I said, you have to change that story too. The highway is our greatest asset because inside of every one of those cars is a potential customer, and it's our job to seduce them into stopping and getting out of their car and coming and exploring our town centre. And the retailers said to me in follow-up meetings that that had revolutionised the way that they were looking at their town. So the stories, we have to address those stories. So this is just to contrast those two pictures to show that the retailers embracing the footpath is absolutely key to the vitality of any shopping precinct. Now I'm going to illustrate how our stories always manifest themselves into physical space. That's why I can read a town's stories just by looking at the town centre. So this is Tuncurry again. What do I read from this yellow fence? Don't bother coming to my shop. So this is, as a placemaker, what I have to do to alter stories is actually deal with the physical manifestation of those stories into physical space. Oh, yep, next one. So, council, this was a very interesting conversation I had with council about removing this. Dozens of people have tried to convince them to remove it. I don't have time to tell the story. But anyway, it's coming out. Right, let's keep going. And this is what replaced it. Now, all this was done in 7 days, and this is only one of 20 projects. Now, these stories have... Oh, no, I'm almost at the end. Thank God, he said. When I built this deck in my backyard I decided to put some furniture on it, and I took my daughter furniture shopping, and I said, I want the best outdoor furniture I can possibly buy. And I spent $2,000 on this furniture that you can see here. Now, my daughter, who often travels with me, she said, Dad, I know you're not going to like to hear this, but I really do think you should bolt that furniture down. And I said, you know what I tell every town I go to. You bolt furniture down, it tells people a message. This town is a mob of thieves and robbers. And we say, you've got to put loose furniture in your public spaces. You just must. And she said, yeah, Dad, but we're usually only putting like $90 chairs out. We're not putting $2,000 chairs out. Now, I didn't nail it down. And one day a lady was sitting on one of the chairs and she said, you know, you've started a huge debate in our community. She said, 50% of us believe that the furniture will get stolen, 50% believe it won't. And I went, yes. I've started people talking to each other just by not nailing my furniture down. Now, the amazing thing is that not even a cushion has gone missing. And do you know how that changes a community's perceptions of itself? 50% of people used to think they lived in a community full of thieves and robbers. That 50% are now going, oh my God, it's not really that way after all. So addressing these fundamental stories that communities tell about themselves is a key task to undertake, and finding ways to alter them. So in summary, how to be a citizen who makes change happen? 3 questions. Ask yourself 3 questions. Yes. How do I address the problem using only the resources I already have? Now, incidentally, that includes your deficits. I'd love to tell you stories about my passion is your deficits are always your greatest potential assets. And that's the way I work with towns. Asset-based, I think you need to put another D in there, which is A, D, B, C, D. Assets and deficits-based community development. I'm serious. Anyway, I don't have time to tell you about that. Let's go. Next one. How can I live today like I want to live tomorrow and get lost in a sand dune? What are the stories I'm telling that put a glass ceiling on the possible? And I really want you to think about that personally. If I went around this room, I am sure that everybody in this room would say, I will fly when I get my degree, when I get the promotion, when I find the perfect partner, when I get rid of the person I thought was the perfect partner. You are giving your power away and saying that you will fly when? Fly today, using only what you've got, including your deficits. Change the story, your own personal story. Thank you.